So Anthropic just released Opus 5 and it beats Fable on most of the benchmarks. So the question for this video is pretty simple. Why do you still need Fable? So by the end of this video, you will know everything about Opus 5, how it stacks up against Fable 5, against GPT-5.6, against Kimi K3, where it's good at, and where it falls flat on its face. Alright, let's get into it. Let's look at the page that Anthropic has put up. Let's look at some early reviews and look at the benchmarks. So right at the top of the page, Anthropic is saying that it's a model that comes close to the frontier intelligence of Claude Fable 5 at half the price. Which is true because Claude Opus is $5 per 1 million input tokens and $25 for 1 million output tokens, while Claude Fable is $10 and $50 respectively. Now let's go at the first top and look at the benchmarks. So right away we can see that agentic terminal coding is 43.3%, which is a whopping 10% above Fable. I mean, it's a bit hard to believe, to be honest, and 10% above GPT-5.6 as well. So it's clearing both other frontier models by 10%. Now let's look next at the GDPval, which is more about knowledge work, DAX, analysis reports. Again, beats Fable by about 100 points. Same for GPT-5.6. Pretty significant, I would say. So again, these benchmarks, they're comparing directly to GPT-5.6, but we'll take a look at how it compares to Kimi in a second as well, with some independent benchmarks. Now going next in the benchmark table, if we're looking at the AutomationBench, again, roughly 10% clearance against the Fable and the previous Opus 4.8 and the GPT 5.6. So this benchmark basically is kind of a Zapier-like benchmark showing it working on some boring workflows. And the interesting thing, if you look at the Anthropic system card, what they're saying when I was looking into it is that medium effort of Opus 5 scored 24% at 90 cents a task, again outperforming both Claude Opus 4.8 and Fable 5 at less than half of the cost. Which is, to be honest, a little absurd that the medium effort of Opus 5 is beating Fable 5. But well done. Now let's continue looking at these benchmarks. They added the ArcAGI 3, which is a new benchmark when I was looking into it. So this benchmark shows the puzzles that the model has never seen before. It measures whether the model can adapt, not just rely on its training data. Now, what's interesting is they're not showing the number for Fable, surprising, but the number for Opus is just significantly higher than Opus 4.8. So that means the models with time are becoming more and more independent, or I guess less dependent on the training data, and can reason in the more generic capability level. And so humans score 100 on this benchmark. That's kind of what they're showing as the ArcAGI 3. Now there are some other benchmarks to look at here. Stuff like Frontier Code, which it's a bit behind Fable. And the funny thing is they've updated this chart because when I was looking at it yesterday, they had this Opus 5 highlighted. It reminds me these days of GPT, if you remember how they were showing their charts. Other than that, legal and health, it's not as good as Fable, but how many of you guys are actually using it for legal or health? But even if you are using it, it's still better than the previous model, and twice cheaper than Fable. Same kind of goes for biology, pretty good results. Now let's switch to some independent benchmarks. Looking at the DeepSWE, which all of us love, we see that Opus 5 comes a bit on top of the GPT 5.6 Sol. That said, it is also about 4% higher on every effort level than Fable 5. So if we look at Claude Fable 5 at high, we're going to see 69%. If we look at high of Opus 5, it's 73%. Then medium Fable shows 65%. Medium Opus shows 69%. So it's better than Fable, but it's very on the edge around GPT 5.6 based on these benchmarks. And it is more expensive than GPT 5.6. If we look here, medium Opus comes at roughly $3.3, which is high GPT 5.6. While Opus High gives you $6, which is again almost twice as GPT-5 High. So I'd say the difference is very small, like 2 or 1% versus the high or extra high between Opus and GPT 5.6. But I do see one good pattern for you to note, is that the max and extra high levels of effort on Opus 5 don't really give you almost any extra edge versus high, but it's twice as expensive. So 50% for extra high and another 50% on top of that for max. So what I would advise is to use Opus 5 on high or medium levels, depending on what you're using it for. All right, let's look at Artificial Analysis Index. So this one, we've all seen it many times. Let's look at the intelligence first. So at the intelligence, Opus 5 at the max effort level tops everything. So it tops Claude Fable 5. Again, kind of proves the point of why do you need Fable 5 at this point if you have Opus, which is more efficient and half the cost. Now, here though, it is better than GPT 5.6 and Kimi, but again, Kimi, still surprising. It's almost as good as the Opus 5 and GPT 5.6 and Fable 5. So we've got this kind of, you could say, top 4 of the frontier models, and this Chinese model is there. So well done. Now looking at the briefcase benchmark, which is more about spreadsheets, presentations, memos, reports, and other stuff like this, we again see Opus topping everything, but topping it not just by a little, but by a significant amount. It's 1,720 versus 1,574 for Fable. And surprisingly, Kimi is higher than GPT 5.6. But again, we're talking about Opus in this video, so it's a significant leap. But that said, if you deep dive into the quality of presentations versus analytics, what we're going to see is that on analytical quality, Opus does beat everything, but on presentations, it's pretty on par with GPT 5.6, which GPT 5.6 is a bit better, but I guess it's more about taste in the end if they're roughly the same. Looking at the price and cost per task now, what we're going to see is that Opus 5 is a bit more expensive than Opus 4.8 here, but again, quite a bit less expensive than Fable 5. So comparing it to Kimi, which is $1, Opus is $2, so twice as expensive. Those additional extra capabilities probably are worth it for most people, but again, depending on what you're using it for, still Kimi is at a very good level, which is at roughly the same level of GPT 5.6, which again is $1 if you look here. Another interesting thing that I found in the system card is when they're talking about the vulnerability discovery. We all know that Fable 5 is pretty much cog blocking you and not allowing you to do almost anything, because whenever you ask it about vulnerabilities, it runs to his mom and says, oh, they're asking me to do something bad, I'm not going to do it. What they found is that Opus 5 is almost as good at these benchmarks, not as good as, but almost as good as, but at the same time, it will go and discover these things. So, and they're talking about safeguards on Opus here as well. What they're basically saying is that the Opus 5 cyber classifiers are proportionately less restrictive than those of Fable 5. So Opus can find vulnerabilities in the source code, but kind of block some vulnerability scanning. But again, it's better and it's going to allow you to do more than Fable, which makes me wonder if they release a new Fable, are they going to lower the restrictions or no? We'll see. Although I would be very surprised they're allowed to do this, considering that the GPT 5.6 just so recently broke all of the guardrails and escaped to hack into Hugging Face. If you haven't seen this news, check it out. It's pretty wild. By the way, if you're finding this video useful, consider subscribing. It would greatly support the channel. Now, going back, let's look at some of the early reviews from some of the people on Twitter. So T is basically saying that it's kind of an in-between GPT 5.6 Sol and Fable 5. Has a lot of Fable states, but also comes with GPT 5.6 thoroughness. So it's basically more likely to catch the things that Fable missed. The other thing that's worth checking out is probably Opus 5 working on the CSVs. They are saying that it's much better, so I'm gonna try that out as well. So Fable is just done. Look at it this way, if Opus is as good at or better at half the price, why would you even use Fable anymore? So what I found, and the consensus that I'm seeing on Twitter, is that Fable is still better at strategic thinking, at decision making, and you can use it to drive Opus 5 for all of the tasks and execution of that. So this combination of a bigger model doing strategic thinking with Fable, and Opus as a smaller model than Fable doing all of the day-to-day tasks is what you should be aiming for. But there's still this huge difference. Many people will just switch to Opus because it's cheaper and does almost all of the same tasks. So my expectation is that they're going to release Fable 5.1 or 5.5, whatever they call it, pretty soon, because they need to. They need to make people pay these extremely expensive money for the Fable model. So considering that Mythos was released in March originally, internally in Anthropic, and then Fable was released in June, I think that we are getting closer to a new release of Fable soon. Which makes me wonder, GPT-5.6 was announced not so long ago. It used to be that Anthropic comes out with a good model, and then GPT comes out with a better model after that, which happened to Fable and GPT-5.6 being kind of on the edge and many people's driver versus Fable, because Fable is just so restricted and runs out of usage pretty fast. Now Opus is as good at and better in some things than Fable and GPT 5.6. So GPT needs an urgent response. And considering they just released the model, I don't know if they can do that. All right, so that's the video. That's everything you need to know so far about Opus 5. What I suggest is try it out, start using it. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe, because I'll be making more videos on Opus, building games and building interesting things, which is what I'm doing right now in the background. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.